Okay, so in the last video, David Attenborough eloquently explained how the diversity of life here on Earth arose, and he mentioned that all life is related. Now in this video, I'll present the evidence for such a remarkable claim. As usual, as you go through the video, remember to fill out the learning guide, and by the end of the video, you should be able to answer one question. And our question is, what evidence supports the idea that all life is related? Now here is a simplified phylogenetic tree showing the relationships of most of the main groups of organisms that presently exist on Earth. If all life is indeed related, that means that all current species have a universal common ancestor, as shown here. If this is true, then we would expect that all species on Earth would have inherited at least some traits from this last universal common ancestor, and therefore each species on Earth would share some traits with all other species. So take a moment and pause the video and list all of the traits you can think of that all species on Earth, including single-celled species, share. Try to focus on things that happen inside of the cell, some of which we've already discussed. I'll give you a moment. Okay, so let's see if you came up with any of these. First, all species share similarities in how they express genes, also known as the central dogma. As you've seen previously, all species have the same nucleotides, A, T, C, and G, in their DNA. And with a few retrovirus exceptions, DNA is the genetic material of all species. In terms of gene expression, transcription and translation are carried out in a remarkably similar way in all species on Earth, from bacteria to multicellular eukaryotes like us. We can even see close similarities in the structure of these proteins involved in transcription that would only be present if these very different species shared a common ancestor. These similarities could not have occurred by chance. You've seen previously that the sequence of DNA in genes determines the function of the protein that gene encodes. Proteins are chains of amino acids. Each 3-nucleotide DNA sequence, or codon, encodes an amino acid. Which codons encode which amino acids is known as the genetic code. There are U's instead of T's here because this table shows the codons in RNA instead of DNA. The order of codons in a gene determines the order of amino acids in the protein that gene encodes. And here's the remarkable thing. With very few exceptions, all of these codons encode the same amino acids in all species. For example, the codon UUU encodes the amino acid phenylalanine in the smallest of bacteria and in the most complicated of eukaryotes. And the only way this could be true is if all modern species inherited this very genetic code from their common ancestor. So our second line of evidence that supports the idea that all species are related is that all species share the genetic code. A fortuitous consequence of this is that we can insert a gene from one species into another, and for the most part, it will work. The same codons present in that gene are read the same way in different species because of their common genetic code. So the gene can still produce its protein correctly. And this is the basis for producing genetically modified organisms, or GMOs. A GMO is just an organism that contains a gene from a different species. For example, if a gene from Bacillus thuringiensis, a soil bacterium, that kills insects is placed into corn, this would result in corn that's resistant to the pest, the corn borer. And this is also how we produce insulin on a massive scale. The animal genes that make insulin are cloned into bacteria, and insulin is made by the bacteria. Lastly, there are some genes that all species on Earth have. Genes don't just appear in an organism's genome. Individuals get genes from their parents. Similarly, current-day species get their genes from their ancestors. So if all species have some of the same genes, then they must have inherited these genes from a universally common ancestor. So, all species are related. They have some of the same genes, the same genetic code, and a similar way of expressing genes. Okay, so all of this suggests that all species on Earth do indeed have a single common ancestor, and at this point you should be able to explain the evidence for this idea. Well, this is the last video on this section on evolution, and evolution is going to form the basis for several parts of this course, so it's probably a good idea to understand this material as well as you can before moving on. So that's it. See you guys later.